We are following along in this book called Welcoming the Stranger. And we're in the middle of page 5. We talked about perspectives last week, some of the perspectives of individuals involved, some of the perspectives of people that just have a feeling for the immigration issues that are going on in this country. So we kind of got down to the second paragraph of page 5. I want to read some things, and I asked you to look at page 61 in the book if you have a book. But if you don't have a book, we're going to read it to you, and we'll get it caught up that way. So starting in the second paragraph on page 5, it says, since the first edition of Welcoming the Stranger, another category of stranger has become particularly controversial. Refugees who have long come to the United States with legal status at the invitation of our federal government have joined immigrants without legal status as a uniquely suspect category of foreigner in the minds of many Americans. As with the debate over illegal immigration, the refugee debate seems frustratingly simple to those on either side. To some, it is foolhardy to admit anyone into our country from nations plagued with terrorism, lest we welcome terrorists themselves. To others, welcoming the persecuted and oppressed is an unqualified good, integral to our national character. The two sides have a hard time understanding the other, as evidenced by the harsh words shared over social media and even over family dinners and church potlucks. Okay, when he throws in the category of refugees, it muddies up the immigration situation in the United States. And so I thought we need to spend a little time talking about what refugees are, what they're trying to accomplish, and some of the things that have made them seem dangerous, I guess is the way to describe it. So let's turn to page 61 in the book, if you have a book. This was something I was unaware of, and hopefully shed some light on this. It talks about the Refugee Act of 1980. Now they will talk about this act again later in later chapters, but at this point you have to understand what this act is in order to understand what's happening in the country today. It says during World War II, millions were forcibly displaced from their homes. Now, since World War II, we've had a similar situation with the civil war that was going on in Syria. But most of those refugees were going where? Asia, Europe, okay? They would try to get into Greece and Turkey. From there, they try to get into West Germany and other countries because they were looking for safety and security. They were looking for wealthy countries that were willing to take refugees in. It says millions were forcibly displaced from their homes, and in its wake, several nations came together to create a global system to protect and assist refugees. The United Nations created the 1951 Refugee Convention and the subsequent 1967 Protocol, which outlined the framework to define a refugee and afford them legal protections and rights for the global community. Now what does that mean? That sounded like a bunch of lawyer mumbo-jumbo. What does that mean? Unless you can define what a refugee is, you don't know who is a refugee. It's that simple. In the United States in the 1970s and 80s marked an era of forced migration in which thousands of Indo-Chinese and Soviet Jews were coming to the United States. Senator Edward Kennedy started a conversation in the Senate about streamlining the United States' response to the global refugee crisis. In response to that, the Refugee Act of 1980 was the first comprehensive legal system that codified the definition of a refugee based on the UN Convention and Protocol on the Status of Refugees, while also establishing a uniform and permanent system for the admission of refugees to the United States. And when it says admission, it means what? Legal admission. Okay? We're not talking about somebody that's crossing over a fence. We're not talking about somebody that's swimming over a river. We're not talking about somebody that's sneaking into our country. We're talking about persecuted people that are fleeing a dangerous situation, and they are utilizing this act to qualify as a refugee. And if you do qualify as a refugee, you may be granted asylum. The Refugee Act authorized the President, in consultation with Congress, to determine the annual refugee admissions ceiling, the maximum number that this country could receive for a given year. Though in many instances the actual number has fallen well short of the ceiling, and established the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which provided assistance to refugees after the arrival to the United States. The Refugee Act has provided the basic framework for the United States Refugee Admissions Program, which continues today. Although the presidentially determined ceiling of refugee admissions has declined dramatically in recent years. The ceiling was set at 271,700 for fiscal year 1980. That was the first year it was in effect. It went to 142,000 in fiscal year 1993. It went to 110,000 in fiscal year 2017, which was the Obama administration. And it was now at a historical low of 45,000 for fiscal year 2018, which is the current administration. So, what does that mean? We're okay, I'm paraphrasing here, we're okay with having people who are actually being persecuted actually fall into the qualifications of a refugee as long as it doesn't exceed these numbers. Now, how do you administer these numbers? I see everybody's eyeballs rolling back in their head.
Well, these programs that have been provided should have those numbers, shouldn't they? These programs that have been provided to protect these people should know how many people are coming into our country, whether it is legal or illegal, with a number.
Essentially, you have immigration judges who take these figures and apply them towards the people that are accepted for applications. Who enforces the act? Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. That's why they call them ICE. Okay? So, the point of bringing this up in this book is most of us, in our perceptions of what the immigration problem is, feel like we're being overrun at our borders. Okay? We feel like they're coming across unprotected borders, sneaking in the country, attempting to infiltrate into cities that will grant them sanctuary and hold down jobs or suck on the society. Okay? What is this act saying? There are refugees that don't need to sneak into the country. In order to be accepted as a refugee, you present yourself at the border, turn yourself in, and request asylum. And then it's up to Immigration and Customs Enforcement and up to the judges as to whether or not you have a legal case to be a refugee. Everybody follow me so far?
In other words, they get here, but they've got to prove that they are here legally.
They have to prove that they qualify as a refugee.
For what they're applying for.
Now, what you may not know is when you see in the news about these caravans of people coming to the United States, those are people that are attempting to request asylum. Okay? Let me read you something out of a Time magazine article I found. that might help you understand this a little better, okay? Now they're talking about the policy of what to do about all these refugees, because literally they are overwhelming the system. It says the question at the heart of the policy remains unanswered. What moral obligation do wealthy nations like the U.S. owe to the world's most vulnerable? Or, to put it another way, to whom should Americans grant refuge or asylum status? When the U.S. signed the 1967 UN refugee protocols, a refugee was defined as someone outside his country of origin who is afraid to return because of persecution, quote, for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, unquote. So the definition of a refugee is someone who was born in another country who is afraid to return because of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group or political opinion. That's the defined definition of a refugee. So when they come here and they request asylum, before they can be granted asylum, they have to meet one of those criterias under the law. Everybody with me?
I have a question.
Okay.
I missed something along the way.
Okay.
The numbers that you were saying started out with 200-some-thousand refugees down to 40,000 refugees now. Is that the max we accept, or is that how many have come in?
That's the maximum ceiling. That's the maximum as defined, because the law was defined so that the President of the United States could set the ceiling for how many refugees could come in. Not Congress, not Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but the President.
So with Trump, President Trump refusing to let these people in, does that mean we've already met the ceiling?
No, what that means is he now believes that the 45,000 is too much.
Well, then he could change it.
He can change it. He certainly can. And he basically is making noises like he's going to. If you've been listening to the news this past week, essentially he said, I'm about ready to close the border. I'm not going to let any more refugees come in. And when he says close the border, he doesn't mean close the border to people that are coming over here for regular business. He's talking about closing the border for anyone requesting refugee asylum. Okay. But the main point I'm going to all this trouble to share with you is this is not the same immigrant as the one that's sneaking across the border trying to find a job over here. And we tend to lump them together as the same issue. The ones that are coming over here requesting asylum are bringing what with them? Their families, okay? And the U.S. has ruled, particularly the Department of Justice has ruled, that if someone breaks the law in coming here, they're not here with documented status, you cannot keep a child with a criminal. So we are attempting to find places to house these children, minors, away from the folks they came with. That's causing big problems, overwhelming our system. Does that help explain things, or does that just make it more muddy? I'll assume everyone understands. Okay.
Are you saying if their parent is a criminal or just anybody?
Well, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has said if you come over here without the proper papers, you conducted a criminal act. It's against the law. And therefore, they are held in one holding facility until such time as they can be deported. The children, if any, that came with them, family members that came with them, have to be housed someplace where they can be given medical treatment, something to eat, shelter over their heads, the necessary. Some of these are pretty young kids. Some of these may actually need foster care, may actually need someone to nurture them and see to their basic needs. And what to do with them while they're over here is becoming more and more difficult. Now, if the adults, pardon me?
I was under the impression that if the children came with them, they're just as criminal as the adults that brought them. But the children that are born here, after they get here, are U.S. citizens.
The children have no status, criminal or otherwise, because they're minors.
But we are responsible to take care of them.
Well, I'm asking, aren't we?
No, we didn't ask to get them here, and they came here illegally.
No, but if...
It's quite a situation.
Well, it is an incredible situation. You're absolutely right. We have a obligation, I guess is the best way to say, in treating even criminals humanely. Okay? I mean, don't you agree?
Well, yes.
Okay.
But it seems to me if the parents are, not willing to separate from those children in order for them to have care, then they should leave and take the children back with them.
But let's just say they're coming. Let's just say they're coming here from fearing persecution. I'll read you some examples here. Let's just say they're coming here fearing persecution. They turn themselves in at the border and request asylum, and the first thing that happens to them is they get separated from their kids. And we lose accountability for where these kids belong.
And in
United States.
reality, the children are the innocent victims. You know how traumatized that would be for a young child.
Yeah.
To suddenly be taken from their parents, cast into maybe nobody that they know, not even other children that they know.
And as you point out, they may in fact have committed a criminal act, but they're minors. Okay, they are involved in this only because they came with mom or dad or uncle or aunt or grandpa and grandma to request asylum, and the first thing that happened was they got separated. And sometimes, at least initially, lost control of where they belonged, to where mom and dad or aunt and uncle or grandpa and grandma were physically deported and the kid is still here.
The child should never be separated from his parent, but
well, but how do you keep them together?
well, they should stay with their parents.
That would be a solution, yeah. Melvin, you had a hand up.
Well, that's the same law that we live under as citizens of the United States. The very same law. If the parents commit a crime and get sent to prison, of course the state takes custody of the children, or if the parents commit a crime toward the children are removed from the parents' custody and come under governmental control. However, it's state where the refugee children come under the federal government guidelines, but within the continental United States they come under the state government. But it's the same law no matter what level of humanity it's applied to them.
Yes. And so, yeah, when you think about this situation, we're treating these the same way. We're separating minors from the people they came with because they're treating the people they came with as criminals. Yeah.
Well, the people that are being deported then back to their country, why wouldn't their children be sent back with them? But from articles I have read, sometimes they don't even know where the children are that belong to these parents that they're deporting them. I'm sure I've read that.
That's true.
Articles.
That's true, yeah.
So there's something wrong with our system too.
Oh, yeah. How you doing, Elaine? I didn't mean to distract you. How you feeling?
I'm feeling better this morning.
I'm glad to see you.
Thank you.
All right, let me read you just 3 examples that were cited in this article. Okay, now keep in mind the definition of what a refugee is. I'll read it again. They are a foreign-born person outside of their country of origin who is afraid to return because of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. All right, so here's the first example, and this is just examples. I'm not trying to say this is everything. This is just 3 examples. Darlena Rodriguez, 25, left Honduras with her husband, her 3-year-old twin girls, and her niece because they didn't have enough food. Sometimes you go 1 day or 2 days without eating, she said. I can take it, but the children can't. So she's fleeing from lack of food. Patricia Hernandez, 39, fled her town in El Salvador, where she was raped and stabbed after being accused of reporting a gang member to the police. David Maldonado, 31, who was a construction worker, fled Honduras after gang members shot him with a 9mm pistol, once in each leg, just above the knee. What was his crime? He was trying to take a job from a construction site controlled by a rival gang. Now, all 3 of those examples probably don't qualify as a refugee. But all 3 of those examples are people that are afraid to stay in their own country. They're looking for a safe place to live. By June 2018, less than 15% of the people applying for asylum were allowed to proceed through the process, which is down from nearly 33% a year earlier. As of last year, the U.S. agreed to accept fewer refugees than it had in 40 years. That was that figure I told you earlier, 45,000. So, if the parents, aunts, uncles, grandpas, whatever, show up here requesting asylum, and they don't appear to meet the criteria for what a refugee is, they're put on the next bus for deportation. If on the other, and stop and think about that for a minute, where are they going back to?
Where they go back to?
Right back to the situation that caused them to leave. Okay?
Many of them face death when they go back.
Yeah. So, I'm not saying this to make you feel sad. I'm just saying this because this is part of the situation that we have gotten ourselves into.
You know, in immigration, way back there, when they came into New York and they were sent to that, well, I can't think of the name of it right now.
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island. Now, I visited in Roten Hour in New York, and they talked about a number of the people that came over then didn't get to stay because they didn't qualify. If there was any illness whatsoever in there, they were sent back home because they would be an asset to our country.
Yeah.
Take care of it.
The book is.
So this is a problem that's been going on for a long time.
Oh, absolutely.
They have to really pass a pretty strict
Yeah, this is nothing new. Yeah, this
to get to stay in this country.
Yes. Where these immigrants and asylum seekers are coming from is changing, but the problems you're talking about have not changed. We've always had criteria for acceptance for asylum. We've always had criteria for acceptance for immigration. But in recent times, that criteria is kind of morphed into public policy and less legal regulations. Okay? So more about that's coming up in the later chapters.
You know, what they seem to be running into now is there's so many crossing illegally, they don't have a place to keep them. And they're releasing them into these cities along the border.
Yeah. And our president has basically said this week that Mexico's not doing their job and stopping them at the border. Well, that puts the burden of, the problem is still there, it just puts the burden on another country. And I'm not saying he's wrong, I'm just saying it just puts the burden on another country. All right, well, let's read a little more here. Okay, we kind of got down to there. All right. So when you hear about these caravans of people traveling towards the United States, these are people that are joining these caravans for self-protection. They're essentially looking for places to land, so to speak, and they're working their way to the United States because they think the United States is deep pockets. And in a lot of ways, compared to Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico, we do have deep pockets. Okay. So under the U.S. law, the Refugee Act of 1980, we just read that in greater detail. It is going to be covered in chapters 4 and 8. These people aren't sneaking over the border. They're presenting themselves at our border crossings and requesting asylum based on persecution categories. So where can these people be safely and humanely sheltered while their asylum claim is being investigated? Immigration courts that review asylum cases are backlogged for years, and there are no facilities to keep families together. In fact, legal policy is to separate them. And loss of accountability happens if you do separate them. So let me read the bottom half of page 5, and then we'll throw open for some questions here. Less vocal in these immigration debates. I'm on 3 paragraphs up on the bottom of page 5. Less vocal in these immigration debates are the many who suspect that immigration is actually a complicated, nuanced issue. You see some of the complications now? Partisans of a particular policy position are apt to view the issue as very simple, right versus wrong, or us versus them. Yet as political scientist Amy Black notes, it is these easy issues that often prove to be the most complex and the hardest to resolve, since our presumptions keep us from hearing the other side. Within this debate, a growing middle recognizes that this is not a simple issue. They want a more thoughtful, informed understanding of the issues than offered by a 2-minute screaming match by advocates of differing perspectives on cable news channels and talk radio. Those of us who seek to follow Christ, in particular, face a challenge in sorting through the rhetoric to understand how we can reflect God's justice as well as His love and compassion in designing a national immigration policy and in the ways we relate individually to the immigrants of our community. So, let me find my notes here, see where I'm at. So how do we sort through the angry rhetoric? How do we apply this Christ-like justice? What can we do? We're a cog in the wheel. What can we do? What needs to be done? What do you think?
Pray for one.
Do what for one?
Pray for one.
Pray for one, absolutely. That goes a long way. What else?
I guess we could look at, be more mindful of churches of Christ in Texas and places along the border that are trying to evangelize and realize that we have a great mission opportunity. Without having to send money overseas, we can do it right here in this country and train some of these people that are here. And if they do go back, they'd learn the gospel and they can plant churches, change their heart before.
I agree. I agree. You don't have to go to their country to recruit them, they'll come here. And they basically come here with at least a rudimentary belief that there is a God, okay? Now they may be taught in the Catholic faith, they may be taught something totally different than what we believe and can find in the Bible, but at least they believe that there is a God, okay? So yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we can do is kind of what we're doing right here. We can look at some of the complicated issues that are involved in immigration without getting upset. Because when you hear some of the issues that are going on here, and you hear some of the families that are ripped apart, and you hear some of the horror stories, you tend to filter that information through what you already believe. And that's why I spent a little time talking about perceptions. Each of us has a perception on what we believe is the problem. But it's a complicated problem.
Well, part of our thought is we empathize with these people. We feel for them because they are God's people.
We should.
But we also, in the back of our mind, we don't want to find our country in the same position that these countries that they're fleeing from.
That's true.
That is part of the background of the way people feel about what is happening with just any and everybody being allowed to come into our country.
Well,
that's just my version of it.
no, that's fine. I mean, I appreciate your view. It isn't so much that they're allowed to come in our country as it is that they are taking advantage of opportunities to get into our country, okay? In other words, if ICE comes across someone who doesn't have the proper documentation, then they can and should put them in the system to see whether they're either a refugee or they need to be deported, yeah. And when someone turns themselves in requesting asylum, we should screen them to make sure that they are in fact legitimate and not harmful. So let's talk about
Tom?
yes.
Do you remember when our daughter Haley was here last Sunday?
Yeah.
And she told us that her daughter Grace had a Hispanic friend.
Mm-hmm.
And that friend's dad remained in Mexico. And so there is a divided up family.
That's what's happening right now. I mean, part of the family, they understand the risks in coming here. Part of the family may be willing to accept those risks, part of the family may not, or part of the family may have been deported and now they're separated that way. So immigration has become very divisive, not only in our opinions, but divisive in terms of families being pulled apart. All right, our time is up. Let me see if I can leave you with some, we're going to start here. What we are attempting to do is to expose the system as it exists today and then see whether or not you think that it has any hope for the future. Okay? So, read in your book the rest of page 6 and maybe 6 through 9 for next time if you got a book. Thank you for your comments.